Hey Daniel,
Hey Jessica, good to see you. It's been a while.
it has been a while. Yeah, time is sort of confusing right now, but it feels like it's been a minute. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Days mean nothing to me. I'm in a campaign, so yeah, it's just another grueling day.
Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, so that's now. Yeah, your campaign's been busy. I want to talk to you about all kinds of stuff. This week has been a hell of a week. So let's first introduce ourselves. Hi, my name is Jessica Munger. I moved to a men's program director. She, her. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, unceded Mojave land, and excited to be here with my pal Daniel.
And I'm Daniel Lee. I'm on the Move to Amend National Board of Directors. Been so for, I guess, 9 years now. Live in Los Angeles. Also serve on the City Council in Culver City, California. Uh, and work for the James Lawson Institute in the last semester of my doctorate at USC, and currently running for state senate in California District 30.
Chill.
Yeah.
So what do you do in your free time?
Um, I pretend that I remember how to sleep.
Cool. Hard to come by these days. Well, thanks everyone so much for being here. This is Making Sense. This is Move to Amend's weekly broadcast about what's happening and why, the news of the week. And this week has been something. We have a lot of things to talk about. Daniel, I know you've got lots of thoughts. You've got a whole interesting experience you're in right now with running as a progressive and dealing with all of the nonsense that comes with that. I wanted to start by just naming the big thing that has been sort of occupying my brain the last few hours, which is that Biden bombed Syria. So there's that. U.S. Air Force fighter jets bombed a site thought but not confirmed to be related to rocket attacks on U.S. or coalition forces. I think it killed 17 people. The story here is that Biden has approved $285 million worth of Raytheon weapon deals, bombed Syria, deported hundreds of Black and brown people, taken back promises of immediate $2,000 relief checks, stopped minimum wage hike, and has been absolutely useless. So that's the headline.
But just he's not Trump. I
Wow.
mean, did you
No, you
forget?
make a good point.
All right, Jessica, he is
Sorry.
not. He is not Trump. He might be doing some of the exact same things that Trump would do and had planned to do and were on his to-do list before he lost the election in November. But he's not Trump. So
Yeah.
you need to chill, okay?
That
Like,
is,
I don't even
yeah,
know. Like, what are you complaining about?
you're right. I forgot the redeeming quality here is not the person before him. So there's, there's that. Yeah. So we're going to talk about a lot of things, including like this completely disgusting first moment of the Biden administration. But just so you know, in case you're unfamiliar, Move to Amend is a national grassroots organization. We work to fight corporate power, mostly through an amendment to the US Constitution, the 28th Amendment, which states that corporations are not people, money is not speech. And it's our job to understand how corporate power is working in the world, in the United States, how corporate power and the power of money in politics rules so many things around us, including for-profit war. And so we're going to talk about some of the manifestations of corporate rule here. If you don't know about Move to Amend or haven't signed our petition, visit movetoamend.org and get looped in.
Yeah, you really should. And I think, in particular in this context, when you talk about the military industrial complex, people who are not, I guess, paying attention to what numerous presidents have done for the last however many decades will say, well, you know what, you military industrial complex, what is that? And I'm like, it's commerce dictating foreign policy. Basically, it's us buying a lot of weapons from a lot of people at an exorbitant rate each year. I mean, if people really wanted to argue, they could say, "Oh, really need to spend, however many $1 trillion on the military, this one year, so that we can get up to speed." But we spend that every year. Like, we're fighting against ourselves. We're fighting against the health and safety of our citizens in this attempt to continuously fund these companies that apparently have funded campaigns for Democrats and Republicans across the board, for at least 60 or 70 years, or, uh, probably 80, considering when Dwight D. Eisenhower made his speech, he was talking about his lived experience as someone who's about to retire. Not like, this is what I see coming, but this is what I saw. And what we're seeing in Syria right now, it's like we are supporting these companies by killing innocent civilians and justifying it after the fact.
That's right. Yeah, and Shelley has a good point here, right? The Biden administration has stakeholders at the table, right? So when you have people who are making money off of war at the table, telling you, helping you decide if we should go to war, that's an intentional situation. So yeah, military spending in general is a whole, hour-long talk or more in itself. But
27 hours. I think it's 27 hours, but if you can do it in an hour, that's impressive.
No, it's a huge, giant topic, and clearly very related to corporate power, not only in like the money, the actual dollars exchanged, but also just the culture, right? When we create a culture that it's okay to kill people for money, which is what U.S. foreign policy is, that has impacts that are so deep, I'm not even sure we could ever sort of trace them. It's a violent culture for profit.
I feel like they have like neonatal impacts where, like, from a young age, we grow up in the United States, and it's something we have to shake off either purposefully or through, leaders and mentors who tell us otherwise. But, we grow up thinking very pointedly that our lives are just more valuable than other people's lives. And that, the outgroups of that are reflected in both our domestic and foreign policy.
Absolutely. So, it makes sense. Biden has always sort of been a war hawk and, someone who's interested in making as much money off of war for profit as possible. So it's not at all a surprise, but needs to be named, because as we move further into this Biden administration, we're already seeing a whole lot of neoliberal responses saying, like you were joking earlier, right? He's not Trump. Okay. And you know what I mean? I don't know. That's a lot of dropping bombs for someone who owes us $2,000. We have to be vigilant in holding, feet to the fire here, and not being complicit just because, you feel better about.
Well. That's a great point, Jessica, because like I feel like in these times we have to be more vigilant, because there's a tendency under Democratic administrations to, really just look the other way when something happens, because it's our person, and more specifically, it's our guy. It hasn't been our woman yet, and that's a huge problem, because when we are complicit in these type of human rights violations and war crimes, we make it so that when we are outraged and incredibly passionately vociferous under a Republican president, it makes us look like duplicitous idiots. We're just like, yeah, this is wrong, and this is, oh my God, and blah blah blah, and then inauguration day, oh, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have no firm grounding to stand on. You're either in favor of protecting the lives of innocent civilians around the world in every instance, or you don't know what you're talking about. You're just playing some type of political game. And hey, people have made that choice. People who are high up in the Democratic Party or who are just operatives who operate politically either in the Democratic and Republican Party, no matter what administration it is. They've made their choice, but they don't speak for most of the country, who would rather see that money actually spent on the 2,000 month relief checks that you were talking about, or more generally the military budget spent on actually having a social safety net. The universal basic income seems out of mind for a lot of people, but it's like, hey, what if we just shrunk the military budget by like 10%? We could probably do that for everybody right now. What if we shrunk it by 30%? We would probably still be spending more than almost everybody in the world each year. But the people in our country who are still dealing with the effects of COVID from just a public health perspective, but are more specifically right now dealing with the economic fallout from COVID, and are awaiting an eviction tsunami once the eviction moratorium ends. Maybe we can keep those people housed. Maybe we can keep those people from falling into homelessness, both individuals and families. Maybe we can keep those people on a path where, they actually have a little bit of belief in their government. Otherwise, we're going to see something nasty. And, that's just the truth. What's your response to a government that doesn't value your life when they push you and many people out on the street? You lose all faith in that government.
Yeah. 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 I mean, as you're saying, right, it's a policy decision being made every single day by people elected by you, by us, to not end a lot of suffering. That decision is made on a daily basis, and it's pretty clear. And I understand, like, after 4 years of Trump, people really want something to feel inspired by and feel hopeful about. And I get that. And that's important. Like, that is very important, right? I think a lot of people think that we're cynical and like, well, I mean, maybe that's the word you want to use for it, but it takes a lot of hope to be working for a better world. And it takes understanding who is worth investing your hope in, right? Like, these politicians are not the people to be giving you hope and to be investing in, right? These are not the places to find that. The places to find that are in your community, in people, like we're going to talk about the farmers in India later, right? Like, people, community, like actual power from the bottom up. That is inspiring as hell, right? You don't have to hold on to Biden to feel that sense of hope. There are real things that are good in this world, and I don't know. Let's move past the Biden worship,
The last thing I want to say is, like, even if you are invested in Biden for whatever reason, and I realize a lot of people that I work with day to day are, and I'm like, okay, well, push him to do something better. Like, don't just be like, Biden's my guy, but yeah, I don't agree with any of the decisions he's made so far. I'm like, okay, he's still your guy. Do something to stop him from making these decisions. Like, because these are just from the normal playbook that we've seen. Like, I feel like, the people in 700 cities around the country and around the world who protested against police brutality and white supremacy, we weren't looking for a return to normalcy. Normalcy is us being killed on the street on a regular basis by police officers and vigilantes without consequences. We want something better, and we don't think it is radical to think something better can't exist. We think it's pretty freaking logical.
Yeah.
But
absolutely. That's exactly right. So that's why we're here, right? Because we actually believe change is possible, like real radical change. I wanted to talk about something that happened this week, which is that the House passed the Equality Act. So the U.S. House has passed what's seen as landmark legislation that amends the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected groups. The Equality Act extends discrimination protections for LGBTQ people at the workplace, housing, education, and other areas. So this would provide consistent and explicit non-discrimination language protections for LGBTQ people, across these areas, including employment, like I said, credit, education, public spaces and services, federally funded programs, and jury service. So that amends existing civil rights law which I said includes the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, among other things. So that is to explicitly include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected characteristics, which currently doesn't exist. You might remember that in June, there was a big case, Bostock v. Clayton, around Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity because they're types of sex discrimination. So this is critical in addressing that, like that needs to be an explicit, explicitly codified. So Biden issued an executive order directing agencies to appropriately interpret that SCOTUS decision to apply not just to employment discrimination, but other areas of law. But that leaves a lot of vulnerability for future administrations who might refuse to interpret it that way, leaving these protections still vulnerable. So Congress needs to codify this decision by passing the Equality Act to ensure future administrations don't gut it and misinterpret it. And so, this is really important because there are two areas of civil rights law that do not currently prohibit sex discrimination and therefore are not covered by this Supreme Court decision. The Equality Act adds, like I said, sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity to the civil rights law. So it's really important that we understand that, the fight for LGBTQ equity is so much bigger than marriage equality. Even though, I will say that marriage equality doesn't even really exist, right? Because, and I'm gay married, right? I have a major.
It's called Jessica. It's not called married. You're married. That's what it's called.
I can say that because I'm gay. I'm gay married, and I appreciate the ability to be married, of course, but I think that we need to understand, marriage equality doesn't exist because non-monogamous people still cannot be married to each other. And also, marriage equality is one piece of it, but the protections for housing and employment are very important and we really huge, right? Like in my opinion, as a person who again is married to in a same-sex relationship, like to me that's bigger, right? Like employment and housing protections, that's huge. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about this because the Equality Act is important, and it's important that we understand that, we didn't win, queer liberation through marriage equality. So that's an important topic to me. And
for me, I think it's also important to point out that even though it passed the House, I think this specific bill passed the House, even when Trump was president.
Yeah.
And it's not a guaranteed slam dunk in the Senate, because the Senate is like 50-50. It's a weird situation. And, people still think Joe Manchin and certain other people are Democrats. And I'm like, no, don't get me wrong. I'm very disappointed in the Democrats for a lot of different reasons. But even in that context, Joe Manchin is not a Democrat. So there needs to be real work. And I'm not sure if the Democrats are willing to do this. I think they're willing to do the research. I think they're willing to make the speeches, but to do the type of organizing that it takes to really pass something. I know we've talked about this before, but the Republicans have been out organizing the Democrats for 40 years. And it's an open secret, but the responses by the Democrats have been incredibly lackluster. You're not going to win by having a better argument. You're not going to win by being able to cite studies. You're going to win by being able to talk to people in these quote unquote red districts and let them know that the people that you're trying to protect are their family members, are their neighbors, are their coworkers, are people that they individually value, but for some reason our laws do not. And you need to make that distinction and you need to make that connection rather than just saying, oh, this is the right thing to do and we're the Democrats, so that's going to work out that way. It hasn't worked out. And like I said, the vote in the Senate is not guaranteed. And for a lot of people, I live in a county, Los Angeles County, where there are cities like West Hollywood, where there's traditionally a lot of residency by queer people. So they were leading everyone in California and around the country in terms of protections around housing in particular, and making housing allocations specifically for queer people, for queer older people, and the like, and trans people in particular, and non-binary identified people. But that's a small city. Like, West Hollywood isn't big, and those protections don't exist outside of that city for other people in California. So like this act would really protect a large, and I feel like, as more and more people become with like comfortable with like different expressions of gender, different expressions of heterosexuality and homosexuality and bisexuality and asexuality, you know, a lot of these labels won't matter as much, but people will realize, oh, I've known and been around people like this, and I've seen instances where people have been actively discriminated against when it comes to housing, when it comes to employment in particular, and I said nothing, and they were people I cared about, and all humanity, there's not like a strain of humanity where it's like, oh, this is where all the queer people are.
Yeah.
They're they've
everywhere.
existed in every institution, in every field of work, and they've always been your family and your friends, and I feel like a lot of us my age, your age and lower, we know this. We don't have too many problems with this. We're like, yeah, why can't my friends and family be respected in the same way that I am? That's some bullshit. But like, in order for us to make it clear to other people, we need to pass these laws. Like, this needs to be on the books. This needs to be explicit. This needs to say that your past prejudices need to end in these contexts. You can do whatever you want, when you're alone and crying by yourself because, nobody likes you because you don't like anybody else. That's fine. But in the workplace, in housing, in public social context, no, like this is discrimination, and this can't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's a comment in here which I totally agree with personally, that marriage actually shouldn't be a question of the state, right? That we should. I mean, there are lots of reasons people get married, right? I could talk for hours about this, but like, mostly people need to get married so that they can have healthcare and benefits and, a lot of things that we should have outside of marriage entirely. So, that's the thing here is that people need rights. It's not that complicated. And that it shouldn't be wrapped up here. So thanks for taking a minute to talk about that with me. I appreciate it and appreciate the nuance and understanding that there's so much more to be done. And yeah, there's no hope in the Senate for this. I mean, it's not like this is going to be a win or something, but it's something that happened this week that I felt like we should talk about.
I gotta admit, I have a little background hope for the Senate, but
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I don't know. For some reason, as cynical as I am, I always have hope in people, and we don't really need that many. Like, we need like 2 or 3 people, because some Democrats, like Joe Manchin, might be like, well, no, I'm not going to vote for this, but most will, because I feel for the symbolism to some degree, they'll vote for it. So we only need like 1 or 2 other people in the Republican Party. And I don't know, like, the Republican Party has changed a lot since I've been alive. Let me say that. It's never been a party that I've wanted to join or related to, but it's changed a lot. And the Republican Party of like the late 90s, early 2000s was one that was attempting to marry their conservative is not the right word, but you know what I'm talking about, their conservative ideology with the emerging reality of the number of people in their ranks. They started having a lot more people of color in the Republican Party. They started having, the Lincoln Republicans and a lot more queer people in their group. And they were like, okay, so how can we change to accommodate that and be conservative? And they were actually looking towards addressing that before, demigods like Rush Limbaugh became ultra powerful and just started, compelling people to be their worst selves. I'm not as blind as I think as Joe Biden is, and his aim to work across the aisle on every issue, which I think is like, are you sure you want to work with Nazis? Like, I would not recommend that. But like, and that's not all of the Republican Party are Nazis, but a significant proportion have no problem supporting Nazis. And in that context, I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? But outside of that context, I'm like, there are a few people who continue to be elected who are still sort of part of that past vintage that at some point wanted to attempt to, walk into the 20th century. I think it's possible that the Republican Party can walk into the 20th century, or at least parts of the Republican Party. The rest of the party might need to go away forever, and they might need to start something new. Though I think to some degree the Democrats need to do the same as well.
Yeah. So there's that. Let's see, what else happened this week? Well, just quickly, there's not a lot to say on this, I guess, at this time, but it should be mentioned that this week we found out that Derek Chauvin, the police officer who murdered George Floyd, will be tried in March, separate from his conspirators who will be tried in August, it looks like. So I just want to say that to make sure we're all, keeping an eye on that. The carceral solutions don't lead to justice, right? I don't know that there's justice exactly accessible here, but it's still important that we are keeping an eye on this case and applying pressure where we can and organizing our communities where we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will be an interesting decision because, a lot of our more recent uprisings are around this case in particular, and it's really going to let us know from a strategic perspective what else we need to do. Because to some degree, and Jessica, you've been at one of the James Lawson Institutes. One of Reverend Lawson's biggest critiques of a lot of modern movements is that they adhere to this one consistent strategy. And a lot of that strategy is protest, and then we're going to protest again, and then we're going to protest, and then we're going to have a bigger protest, and then we're going to protest. A lot of the most innovative parts of the civil rights movement included, innovations that were like, okay, so we're going to protest, but we're going to sit at this lunch counter because that's not what we're supposed to do. We're going to protest because we're going to ride in these cars that are interracial because that's not what we were supposed to do. Even in like the gay rights movement, ACT UP, they started die-ins, they laid down in the middle of New York City with traffic that doesn't necessarily care if you're walking, and they disrupted things. Like I think it might take a lot more for us as people who really care about this issue and want substantive transformation when it comes to criminal justice and policing. We need to ask ourselves, okay, what else can we do? What more innovative tactic can we take to communicate our seriousness and the urgency of this issue? Because if we're just gonna like have some people show up and then have some people show up and have some people show up and then have some people show up, that'll be like, okay, we need to allocate more funding to emergency policing for a set period of time, then this will wane and then we can ignore it again.
Right.
What is it that we can do to make it so this cannot be ignored?
Yeah. And there's just incredible organizers and innovative activists, who have been working a lot this year, especially in regards to this case. And so, whatever we can do to support them and amplify them and take their leadership, because I think you're right. This is an interesting moment, like in tactics, in all ways in organizing, right? Like we are having to be creative and innovative in organizing for so many reasons, not just the pandemic and like accessibility, but also response, right? There's new things needed, and that's an exciting moment, a revolutionary moment in movement building. So it's exciting to see, but yeah, I don't know. We have to watch this closely and be doing what we can. Hey, George. Hey, everyone in the comments. It's good to see you here. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, Karen, Greg, George. We've got Move to Amend Arizona. Shelly, hey, folks. Let's see. I wanted to talk about this this case with Nestle and this really multi-layered situation that's happening right now. I'll start from the top and chime in if you know about this or like want to make comments. Feel free to interrupt me. So a human rights group filed a lawsuit Friday, I think last Friday, on behalf of 8 Malayan men who say that they were trafficked across the border to Cote d'Ivoire and forced to harvest cocoa for one or more of these like big multinational chocolate companies, including Mars, Nestle, and Hershey. We know that these companies have been perpetuating slave labor for a long time, particularly in Africa. So it marks the first time, though, that a class action lawsuit of this type has been brought against cocoa companies in a U.S. court. Guardian reported that 8 men who are now, young adults are seeking damages for forced labor and associated harms. Child labor is a major and ongoing problem for cocoa production in West Africa. The NORC at the University of Chicago found that 1.56 million children were harvesting cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana during 2018 and 2019 growing seasons, up 14% from 2015. And this is extremely dangerous working conditions. The defendant companies have long pledged the end to the use of child slavery in supply chains, but continuously extend their deadline for meeting these goals. So there have been attempts at regulation here, but Nestle, in the face of stark opposition from environmentalists, a state water board on Tuesday unanimously approved with protests that Nestle's bid to pump 1 million gallons daily for its bottled water from one of the most treasured natural springs in the Santa Fe River in north central Florida. So Nestle is doing a lot of things, simultaneously using trafficking and child labor to harvest cocoa, taking water from natural springs. I mean, Nestle's been doing this all over, right? There was this in California recently too, and like this is happening a lot. But I think it's important to talk about this trafficking issue for a minute. And I'm going to go deep on this for a second. But first, I want to talk about some of the Nestle's top donation recipients in 2020, as reported by Open Secrets. I just want to go over that real quick, because here we are, people who care about money and politics, and the real human impact and environmental impact of how this works. So I might tell you things here that you don't want to hear, but I'm looking at Open Secrets right now at Nestle's page. Their top donor or top recipients for the 2020 election cycle: Joe Biden is first, DNC Services Corporation, Ann Wagner, Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, Republican National Committee, Democratic Party of Texas, Elizabeth Warren, Jamie Harrison, and Pete Buttigieg. So Nestle is a major problem. And the cocoa and chocolate lobby is actually super powerful in convincing people to, not enforce these regulations, right? And we see this a lot in movements where we maybe get some regulations in place. That sounds really good, feels like a win. But then you have the issue of enforcement, which is a whole other thing connected with corporate power, because so much of how the way corporations use their power is a little bit sort of insidious, right? It's not necessarily just these big political donations, but it's like it's a forcing of political will. Yeah. So Nestle's notorious for a lot of reasons. They're a terrible company, responsible for a whole lot of death. And I'm gonna go in on this topic that I feel really strongly about, which is the conversation around trafficking happening right now. Trafficking, as in this story with cocoa industry, happens in all industries, and lots of media pop-ups happening lately about ending trafficking, right? And we're seeing a lot of ultra conservatives using language about child trafficking, which in many cases is linked with like QAnon and other sort of out there conspiracy things. But this language is very evocative to people, right? No one wants to think about child trafficking, but we need to know that the language that's often used about trafficking often leads to policies that are extremely harmful for sex workers, especially, and women, and especially women of color and trans people. So we have to understand that trafficking is a labor issue, right? And so as we're seeing here with the production of cocoa, right, trafficking happens in agriculture, in, domestic work, like in all industries that you can think of. And so when we're talking about how to curb trafficking, we have to be thinking about that from as a labor problem. There are policies like FOSTA, SESTA, which hurt sex workers and also victims of trafficking. And we need to understand that in these conversations, a lot of these proposed solutions are thinly veiled excuses to further criminalize sex work, which then takes resources from fighting actual trafficking and problems like what we're seeing with Nestle, and diverts the conversation just to this one area. So I just wanted to take a minute because that's like really in the media right now. And as we're looking at these mega corporations who are selling us all chocolate that is produced by child slave labor, like we need to be thinking about this and from a holistic labor perspective. So thanks for letting me say my 50 cents about that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Like, and it's very pertinent. I feel like in the last few years, there have been attempts from the California legislature that some have been helpful, some have been misguided in the context of trying to address the issue of trafficking. And I think from a legislative perspective and a policy perspective, we've only really been talking about like potential sex trafficking, which is a huge issue. But it's separate from, the rights of sex workers, and it does not include, trafficking in other industries like this, like agriculture. Like one of the things that I've been talking about in the context of COVID in particular is, the fact that our entire country would have broken down without farm workers, and we need to give them vaccine priority. But then on another level, we need to also make sure that these workers are workers and aren't being compelled, by someone or some company to do this work. When you brought up this topic initially, I remembered a case that I brought up a lot because it was being litigated shortly after I joined the board here at Move to Amend, and it was Kaya Bell versus Royal Dutch Petroleum. It was, another case, unfortunately, of many, many cases where, Shell was basically accused of instructing and financing people who would track down and assassinate environmental activists. And I think, it seems like these cases aren't connected, but they are, because it's really about corporate violations of international law and of U.S. law, and whether or not, we can actually prosecute them for that. And I think it's important that we compel the Supreme Court to assume that we do, because in this case, Kaya Bell versus Shell, Royal Dutch Petroleum, they there was some tort statute that I remember now that I don't know the exact reference for, but like it was a law that was passed like in the 1800s, and they're like, well, because of this law that passed before these type of corporations existed and before, blah blah blah, we can't rule in this. And it's like that's what we get a lot when it comes to international law, and I think we need to set a precedent, and we need to organize towards a precedent that says, no, corporations, you have to recognize human rights internationally if you want to operate within the United States. And I think, this case really holds up that need, because this is not an isolated story. There have been stories for years and years and years and decades of, people more or less being enslaved or compelled to work for corporations. South America, Asia, parts of Africa, and oftentimes it's brushed off as like something that doesn't happen. Oh, it's those warlords who blah blah blah. And when the research is done, it's like, okay, it might be those warlords, which people like to characterize, particularly people of color, as, but who are getting paid by these corporations to make that their operations go forward, and to make sure that any appeals to human rights are ignored, because you can blame them as the vicious perpetrators, and not the corporations. And what happens often is like, once things start, getting hot and people start zeroing in on a practice of a corporation, they'll make one of these warlords a sacrificial lamb, say, oh, look at that bad person. We did not know. If we had known, we definitely would not have done business. And it's so great that that person is out of business now. Don't look at these 6 other people we've been talking to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. So thanks for making that connection with that case too. So I would encourage people as you're thinking, oh, hey, Lawrence, hey, Linda, as you're, seeing a lot of appeals about trafficking, that you understand that also those things can be dog whistles for anti-sex worker legislation. And we need to be careful that when we're talking about this, we're trying to decriminalize sex work, and we are trying to address trafficking from a labor perspective.
There was one more thing I wanted to add in that context. Sorry. But, as it appeals to sex work, I think, we'll find that there is a similar construction to some degree around corporate power. Sometimes, sex workers, in the porn industry go into business for themselves. They reap benefits, but often early on, even though people voluntarily get into sex work, their work is exploited by corporations who are like, hey, I'm with Vivid, I'm sorry, I don't know a whole lot of porn company names, but like, I'm with Pornhub, or I'm with whatever, and we're gonna make you a star, and so give us 80% of what you earn, and they'll lock some young person into a long contract and exploit their work for quite some time. So it's it's a similar thing. And I think, a lot of our laws around sex work sort of feed into that. We don't provide like these venues for independent expression of sex work. We feed into the corporate model, which is an exploitive model, and instead of something that recognizes for some people, this is the only way that they can survive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And decriminalization is the path towards being able to protect those people more in those situations, and making sure that, people who choose this work are able to protect themselves. There's currently, just a plug, since we're talking about this, there's currently a bill in Oregon about decrim, and I would really love for people to check it out. We're asking Oregon state representatives to hold a hearing on HB 3088. So if this is something that you care about or want to get involved in, check out Oregon HB 3088 for decriminalization. Okay, so Daniel, we have about 10 minutes. We want to talk about something actually like good that happened this week, and then a couple of announcements about upcoming Move to Amend stuff. But before we do that, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Any major news issues we missed? I'm sure there's plenty, but.
Well, I think it was instructive this week, as we're talking about, the end of unemployment benefits, for a lot of people a long time ago. The fact that a lot of people are still deeply entrenched in the recession or depression, even though it doesn't look like that for other people who have the privilege of working from home. I think the discussion about the minimum wage, again, is very pertinent. And it seemed, like it was in the vice president's power to move things forward and to make sure that a $15 national minimum wage was something that was actually included in bills that are supposed to pass. It seems like she declined. I've been talking about in the context of my campaign for state senate here in California, that $15 an hour is a vast improvement for a lot of people across the country, specifically for people of color and women who are found to work in a lot of these jobs. But in certain places like California, and I would assume in New York, it's a poverty wage, and it is something that needs to be upgraded to a significant degree. I've been talking about at least a $27 to $30 an hour minimum wage here in California, and the type of wealth taxes that could actually get us there. But I think it was instructive to read the comments of Senator Thune, who proudly said that when I was growing up and I was this age, I got $6 an hour and I was able to do this, this, and this. And for people to quickly do their research and say, well, adjusted for inflation, that's $24 an hour. So yeah, you were doing all right for a kid. But you can see how much less that is for people who have two incomes and a family to be still making, if readjusted for inflation, half as much as you did two incomes. Like if he was making $6 an hour and that would be $24 an hour now, two incomes back then would be, $12 an hour. Now, that's not enough. Of course, you could do those other things.
No, I mean, the fight for 15, that started like 8 years ago?
It's getting close to 10.
So I mean, I'm like, yes, $15 an hour matters, right? But oh my God, it's so, I mean, you can't live in California on $15 an hour. That's laughable.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the things that I've been trying to do with my campaign is start a conversation around the living wage anyway. Wage is, only created to benefit business, even though it sounds like it's the opposite. It's like, that's what most of our regulations are. Most of our regulations have been dictated by industry. Industry has said we need to pollute this. Excuse me. But industry has basically said, "Hey, we need to pollute this much. So could you make the regulation a little higher so it seems like we're doing all right?" And the industry. We want to pay this much, so can you make the minimum wage around here? We think of it as the opposite because that's what we've been told. Our elected representatives passed this to support you and to protect you, but the reality is, industry dictated whatever the limit is, and that limit exists because that's what they want to pay you. We need to ask for more. We need to demand more. We've been going backwards for too long, and that's why so many people are subsisting with so little. It's probably why all of the streaming services are doing so well, because the only thing people can afford to do is stay at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I just wanted to quickly mention, we did not actually talk about HR 1 here. We've talked about it a lot of other places. HR 1, the For the People Act, is a legislative package, which deals with some things that are adjacent to corporate power, money, and politics. The important thing to know here is that HR1 would be massively strengthened by the We the People Amendment, right? We cannot rely on legislative solutions to solve the crisis of corporate power, because the Supreme Court are the folks who enabled corporations to have constitutional rights in the beginning. And so we need a solution that they can't touch, which is a constitutional amendment. So this legislative package is really cool. It's really helpful. And it needs the We the People Amendment in order to make it live and be, enforceable. So again, it's a question of being enforced and challenged by corporate power. So we have a piece on movetoamend.org about HR1. Maybe another staff member or Alfonso could link it here in the chat, so that you can read a little bit more about what we have to say on HR1. Okay, so Daniel, let's end by talking about a story that made us feel inspired this week. I'm feeling inspired by the farmers in India that continue to resist corporate takeover through massive nonviolent showing of power across more than 10,000 sites in India. It's incredible. India is really good at this, right? Hundreds of thousands of farmers have been rallying against 3 new laws that have thrown open the agriculture sector to private profits. The legislation was pushed through Parliament by Modi, which will allow corporate takeover of crop production and trading, eventually impacting earnings and land ownership. This is a very deep and very cultural issue. So I encourage you to read more about the farmers in India and their resistance. They're camping on roads connected to national capital. They're braving winter conditions, smear campaigns. The media is completely not on their side. They're using sit-ins and aggressive boycotts of politicians and road blocking and cross-caste solidarity and union power to build a really impressive show of power. So that's what's giving me life today and this week.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had something else to share, but I feel like that's probably the best way to go. I mean, I feel like every time we, as I said earlier, we, get out onto the streets and we do something that's like, oh yeah, this is great, this is blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't necessarily lead to anything, but I'm repeatedly impressed by the actions in other countries where they get out on the street and they're like, yeah, so we're gonna be out here until you do what we want. And if you don't do what we want, we're just gonna be out here.
Right. Right.
And there's
things to learn.
Yeah. And it's just like, whoa, wow, okay. How can we get some of that DNA here in the United States and just be like, nah, that's not what we want. Come back when you got something better. We're gonna be here.
Yeah.
I mean, we had that, and we've seen that in certain instances where some of our folks have to be dragged away before they consent to go. But now it's like we put all of our hope in a couple politicians who, even if they wanted to do something for us, it's like, okay, that's one person, that's one person who is easily mollified, who's like, oh yeah, Bernie, we'll do that in 2 years, just, don't take as many of your meds as your doctor says.
Right.
People who really want to do stuff, they're trying their hardest, but they can't do it by themselves, and that just underlies the importance of the type of work we do here at Move to Amend, that's really trying to work within the context of a broader democracy movement that's calling for an end to white supremacist public safety, an end to foreign policy dictated by the military industrial complex, and to environmental policy that by and large is dictated by the fossil fuel industry, where we want things to be dictated by the people, and the people have paid for a lot of science, on the national level and on the university levels. So it's yeah, listen to the people, and listen to the people we paid to do the research that the people support, and not these corporate overlords who really want to make as much money as possible and are super convinced that no matter how bad it gets, that their money will protect them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely have a lot to learn from the folks in India right now, and so many other people. But since we're talking about it, I just mad respect for the consistency. Like Linda said, they just stay in the streets. I mean, it's true. It's incredible. So that's what we were saying at the beginning, right? Like, we all need hope. We all want to feel that like something is possible and something better is possible. You don't need Joe Biden, people. Like, you have like people in the streets, like making change consistently and like using these badass tactics, and like those are the people like we need to invest in. So that's what's making me feel really happy this week. Okay, yeah, there's people in the comments talking about more about HR1. There's lots to do here. So Greg, thank you, who posted our piece about HR1. I want to circle back on one of these things, that there are some things in HR1 about the campaign finance reform. It's really important that we understand that campaign finance reform is sort of nothing, right? What we need is an abolishment of corporate constitutional rights and money as free speech. Otherwise, these things are literally band-aids. And so it's important that, like, as we're looking at HR1 and seeing some of this sort of reformist legislation, there's some things that they can mitigate and help with, but largely this is not a revolutionary package of legislation, right?
Well, and the example I would like to hold up is, like, in California, like, campaign finance reform would, likely help to some degree in the context of corporations contributing directly to candidates. What it would not help is the speech that would probably be protected by corporations like Uber and Lyft, who sponsored Prop 22, which was, basically everything I'm saying is the exact opposite of what I'm saying, a proposition that said it would support and protect employee rights, who are independent contractors who work for these companies. There were a couple articles that came out last week with like writers across the board saying, yeah, we're making a whole lot less as a result of Prop 22. But Uber, Lyft, and other, rideshare companies, got together, paid $200 million to get this law, paid to make sure that it could not be repealed without a 7/8 vote of the legislature, which is unheard of. Like, most times things are 50 or 66%, 50% or 2/3. But I mean, that's not going to change if we have, campaign finance reform, which by and large is focused on candidates. If you try to squelch a corporation's right to speech, they'll point you to Buckley versus Vallejo. What the reforms that people are talking about would only be Citizens United. And Buckley versus Vallejo, so I don't do that thing about referencing things that people don't know, was a 1976 case that basically said that money equals speech, and you can have there you can't put a limit on independent expenditures. But it was the basis with Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad for Citizens United.
Totally. So anything that's like campaign finance reform or get money out of politics, like that's lacking a deep analysis about how we got here. So we're not trying to go back to 2008, right? We're trying to go way better than that. So just beware when you see these things, like, you need to abolish corporate constitutional rights for campaign finance reform or anything like that to matter at all. Okay, so before we end, a couple of things, national announcements. So Move to Amend's live report is coming up next week. It was rescheduled from this week. That's where our national director, Caitlin, will go over what's up within the movement to amend. And that you can tune into on Facebook next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. The 28th of this month and every month is our National Day of Action to get Congresspeople co-sponsor HJR 48, the We the People Amendment. So we're in the middle of a big campaign right now to get 100 co-sponsors on the We the People Amendment. It's about to be reintroduced into the 117th Congress by Representative Pramila Jayapal, and we're looking for a bunch of initial co-sponsors to come on. So we are organizing in districts across the country to get constituents together to go and have have virtual lobby meetings with their reps to encourage them to come on as co-sponsors. So if you want to be part of that campaign, movetoamend.org/117 campaign. That's for the 117th Congress. You can get plugged in there, and we'd really love to help you, get your district organized to get your rep on the amendment. And the 28th of the month for the 28th Amendment, we go big. We all make calls, send videos, send emails to our reps, flood their offices with requests to co-sponsor the 28th Amendment. So put on your calendars 2 days from now, that's Sunday, we will go big. You're going to leave messages all through the week anyway, so just call, leave them messages, and take a few minutes to let them know. To tell people to sign the petition. As we're organizing in districts, our petition goes a long way. That's the organizing tool we use to get people involved, and also to leverage our numbers when we're talking to our representatives. We can say there's 1,200 people in your district who want you to do this, and that's really meaningful. So if you can share the petition, movetoamend.org/motion, that will go a long way. Share it with everyone you know. It's much more than just like an online petition that you might see everywhere. And then let's see, what else do I have to tell you? On a more like grounded note, this week has been really hard. Personally hard for several Move to Amend staff people. We're a small staff of 8. Many of us are still working as volunteers to run a large organization. And one of our staff members and their family has run into a severely challenging time and needs some help with family medical bills. So just to be real, if you can help, we will drop a GoFundMe here. If you can help with a family member of one of our teammates to start radiation therapy and beat cancer while there's COVID in the house. So we don't usually make appeals like this, but we're in a time where we are. So if you feel compelled to help, that would go a really long way, and we thank you a lot for that. And then, of course, another huge way that you can help further the movement to amend is by giving financially. So if you visit movetoamend.org/donate, we are a scrappy organization. Every dollar goes a long way. So please consider investing in that way. We don't get money from corporations or big family foundations or the people who give to a lot of the DC-based democracy organizations that have 300 staff. So if you want to be part of a real grassroots funded organization, this is that. And I want to give a huge shout out to Alfonso. Thank you so much for running this today and always. We couldn't do this without you. So we will close out here, and maybe we can share the GoFundMe link again. And Daniel, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off today?
No, just, I hope everybody's still taking care of themselves. We are and still in the middle of a traumatic event that's being collectively felt. And, once it's over, there'll still be, some work that we need to do on ourselves and the people that we care about. So just imploring everybody to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll share this GoFundMe in the comments of this recording, which will be up on Facebook and YouTube. So you can check it there if you would like to contribute, since folks are asking. And take care of yourselves. Hold your loved ones close this week. Shit's crazy. Thank you for being part of this community, and take good care. Good to talk to you, Daniel. Good luck with your campaign stuff and everything else. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Good to see you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Happy weekend.